Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Tessa Keogh, and together with Julie Goucher, and on behalf of the Guild of One Name Studies, welcome to the 8th webinar in our 7 Pillars webinar series. We host this monthly webinar series on the third Tuesday of the month, and more information about the topics, as well as registration links for the remaining webinars, can be found at the Guild website. Our topic today is 6 months in with a new study with Guild members Melanie Caldecott and Karen Hyman Davies. We have a bit of a twist today as Melanie's son is in a school production, and since she can't be in 2 places at once, we pre-recorded her presentation, which is now available at the Guild website. Since Julie Goucher teaches the Pharaoh's Tutors Introduction to One Name Studies course, she's going to be joining Karen during the question and answer portion of today's webinar. Karen Hyman Davies has been a member of the Guild since 2015 and began the Hyman One Name Study soon after joining. However, due to work responsibilities, Karen put her fledgling study on hold and only returned to it this year. Karen has her Hyman study at the members' websites project. Karen's profile for her Hyman One Name study is posted at the Guild website, and you can learn a bit more about her study and find links to her website, as well as contact information at the Hyman profile. And I just wanted to point out 2 items. First, Karen's use of surname distribution maps at her profile is a great example of visually indicating the historical and current worldwide distribution of her surname. It's a simple but impressive way to catch a visitor's interest. Second, I don't know about you, but I am seriously craving bread and wondering about the variety shown in her photo. It appears Karen is an impressive baker as well. You might recognize Karen's name from the Guild Journal. Karen recently started up a series called Connected Lines, where she interviews Guild members to learn about their studies and their approach to one name research. The 3 interviews done to date have been fascinating. I found the best questions so far are, what is your #1 challenge? And if you were to start all over again, what would you do differently? She has received thoughtful responses from the interview subjects. This series is an excellent addition to the journal. And just a reminder that Guild members can read the journal in print form, it's mailed to you, as well as read all of the past journals online as they're available at the Guild website. Karen's Guild-hosted website, Hyman Footsteps on the Trail of Hynans Worldwide, focuses our attention on her website and blog. Karen places her TNG database on the back end of her WordPress website via a Search the Records feature. Karen's website can be found at hyman.one-name.net. By flipping the concept of a TNG database with her WordPress website, all hosted by the Guild Initiative, she's really found the best of both worlds. She can have an original and fully customizable website with an underlying database for her one name study. I want to point out just a few items. Karen's TNG database has the standard search features. Here's an example of a place list using Wales and a name that I knew I'd never be able to pronounce, but we can all find it with the use of the mapping feature. And Karen's use of family trees, in addition to her TNG database, is clever, and it's another visually appealing way to share information. Karen has reconstructed families in a number of countries, and those are shown at her website by clicking through to her listing as shown on the right. Finally, Karen also includes a simple way to contact her, and this is key for anyone wanting to encourage interaction with those who share the surname and have visited your website. Now that you have a bit of flavor for what Karen has produced, let's find out how she went about starting, or rather restarting, her study. We're going to start with a presentation by Karen. If you have questions during the presentation, please ask them on the Q&A box shown on your dashboard, and Julie will be sure to ask them at the conclusion of the presentation. And with that, let's get started by turning over controls to Karen Hyman Davies. Welcome, Karen.
So hello everyone, and good evening from Wales, which if like me you're not so good on geography, is actually part of the United Kingdom. and should never be referred to as England, because we Welsh people get very upset about that. Now, I believe that many of you in the webinar are relative newcomers to One Name Studies. I suspect that at least a few of you might be feeling confused about what you should be doing, or hopefully not the case, but you may even be questioning why you embarked on this idea in the first place. If that's the case, then you have my sympathy, because that is exactly how I felt when I started out. What I'm going to talk about tonight is why I felt that way, what challenges I encountered with my study, and how I've tried to deal with them. So just to set the scene, let me tell you a little bit about my One Name study, which started in 2015 because I ran into some brick walls with research into my own family. I think that's how a lot of One Name studies actually begin. Hyman is my maiden name. I've always known that it originated in Ireland and that it was an unusual name. When I was growing up, apart from my own family, the only time I ever heard the name mentioned was when there was an item in the national news about Cardinal Hyman, who was the Archbishop of Westminster at that time. It wasn't until I actually started the Hyman One Name study that I gave any thought to where in Ireland the name came from, or even if it had any meaning. For years, my father believed that there was a Hyman coat of arms. He'd even bought a copy from one of those vendors that you see often in markets and country fairs. But in fact, this so-called history of the name is very questionable, because what I've discovered is that there really isn't any consensus about the origin of the name. It could be a version of a Gaelic name that means ivy, or it could be a Gaelic name that means the bird and somehow describes a person who was involved with birds, perhaps as a hunter or a trainer of birds or a hawker. But there's always also a distinct possibility that it's the name of a small clan that came from the border between the counties of Tipperary and Offaly, so right in the centre of Ireland. I'm not really far enough into my own research to have come to any conclusions on this, although most of the records I've looked at do in fact show that Tipperary is the key location for the surname. Now, like most Irish names, as a result of migration, you'll also find the surname in England and Scotland, and to a much lesser extent in Wales. What you can see on the map on the right, which comes from Public Profiler, is that the main centres around the world are countries that are closely connected to the British Empire. So New Zealand and Australia, Canada and the USA in particular. I've also found a small cluster in South Africa. But we are talking small numbers. As you can see from the figures on this slide, which are taken from some of the census years, the figure for England and Wales actually stayed well under 30, even until the 1930s. Although my own theory is that those numbers in the early census years are actually higher than are recorded, because the official records don't allow for the fact that large numbers of Irish men, when they moved over to England and Scotland, became navvies and worked on large construction projects like railways and canals. And they did move around a lot and had no fixed residence. Nor do the official figures account for people who lived in or stayed in unofficial lodging houses, perhaps just for 1 or 2 nights before moving on again. Now, I was blissfully ignorant of all of this before 2015, when I registered the name with the Guild, having seen a lot of references in family history magazines to One Name studies. I freely admit I did not have the slightest idea what I was getting into. I didn't really know what a One Name study entailed, let alone how to do one. To get me started, I took a Pharaoh's course called the Introduction to One Name Studies. And from that, I learned that the first step was to collect all references to the name in things like the census records and civil registration records, which I did. What I ended up with was spreadsheet after spreadsheet after spreadsheet and line after line after line of data with absolutely no concept what I was supposed to do with all of this information. I wonder if that sounds familiar to anybody. Looking back, I can see that where I went wrong was on several fronts. One was that I never really considered why I wanted to do this study, nor did I give any thought to how it was different from the kind of family history research I'd been doing up until then. I just blindly jumped in. I couldn't have chosen a worse time to actually embark on this activity because after about 3 months, I had a new role in work, which meant a lot of travel and very long hours. And at the same time, I was in the final stages of a degree course. So I had no time and really no energy to wrestle with spreadsheets. Consequently, the study and indeed my own family history research was abandoned. But by the end of 2017, I was ready to start again. Circumstances had changed, and the interest had never really gone away. But I'd finished that degree course and I had now taken retirement. So that meant I had the time to devote to this activity. Come January the 1st then this year and the start of a new year, it felt like the appropriate moment to begin all over again. And I did begin it over again because I actually threw out all of the spreadsheets that I'd collected up until that point. I knew from the outset this time around that if I wanted to avoid the mistakes of the first experience, I had to do things differently. I couldn't really rush into it in the same haphazard way I'd done previously. I had to be a lot more focused. So I decided to consider my study in the same way that I would have regarded any new project or assignment that I'd been given in work. For me, that meant using the discipline of project management. Key tasks were therefore to have a more clearly defined scope for the surname project, some goals that were specific and measurable, and also a clear path on how I was going to manage the work. But first I had to fill in some very big gaps in my knowledge about what exactly a one name study is and how you go about doing it. So I became a student. I read the 7 Pillars of Wisdom book cover to cover, and it gave me some great ideas on how to get going. I also watched a lot of videos from the Guild, including recordings of past conferences and Google Hangout meetings. The Guild YouTube channel actually became my best friend because I discovered that I could watch it while I was in the gym. So killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I took the Pharaoh's course for a second time and then moved on to the advanced course. The more I studied, the more things began to click into place. But I still had a lot of questions about the nitty-gritty of running a study. And you can see some of those questions on the right of the screen. I found answers by reading old copies of the Guild Journal. Yes, I am a hoarder. I had kept every single one of them since 2015. And I also went through a lot of pages in the Guild Wiki. Having done that, where I was still confused, and there were still places where that was the case, I began contacting individual members of the Guild to ask for help. What I found through conversations, email exchanges, telephone calls was there was no one way to do any of the things that I was going to need to do. Everybody tried or was doing something slightly differently, it seemed. And at first, I found that irritating. I had just expected someone would tell me, do this, and then do this, and then do this. And this is how you do it all. But gradually I learned that that wasn't going to happen. No one was going to come and wave this magic wand for me. I had to decide for myself how to run my study. So I had to do what worked for me. My Next decision was to begin in a very modest way by choosing just one geography rather than trying to, go worldwide. I reasoned that if I could find a methodology to work for one country, then I could replicate it with perhaps a bit of modification for other countries. Logically, I thought I would begin with Wales because it's my home country, so I'm familiar with the geography, and the records were easily available. Even more significantly, it meant I had really small numbers to deal with. And believe me, I really do mean small. Officially, there were no Hynans in Wales before the 1871 census. And then in that year, there were just four individuals, all of whom happened to be my relatives. So I already knew about them. Going kind of forward in time and to subsequent census years, the total number for Wales never got beyond 32. So it was a very manageable number. What I ended up with was a 10-step process. The graphic that you can see on the screen, I hope, has colored circles which represent the main categories of activity that I've identified. Now, these do have a lot of resemblance to the 7 pillars, but I've used terminology that I found more kind of resonating with me. So it begins right at the top at number 1, where I have what I call a search phase. This is where I am trying to establish what records exist for a particular country and where I'll find them. I capture all of that in a simple text document. At one time I did use Excel, but I got fed up with all of the formatting issues that you encounter when you're trying to use Excel for text. I found the Word version much easier to deal with. Every time I come across a new record, so for example, when we get an email from Find My Past to say, here's some new records we've added this week, I just add that information to the list. Doing that helps me avoid the feeling that I need to instantly click on that link in that email, only to find that I've gone down too many side roads and I've wasted a lot of time. But it does mean that I'm not losing sight of something that could be useful in the future. I know it's there. I know I can come back to it when I'm ready. To make a start, I pick one of those records in that document. It'll usually be a census or a birth, marriage, death type record. So let's say, for the sake of discussion today, that I choose the census. I'll go to one of the service providers, whether that's Ancestry or Family Search, do a search on the name, capture all the results in a spreadsheet. I always add an introduction sheet where I make a note of the place where I found the information, the date I found it, a description of the resource, such as the dates it's covered and any gaps in that data set. I save all of that as a raw data version and then do a duplicate, which I then label as my working file. When I've done all that, I move into what I call the data management phase. This is where I'm manipulating all of the information in that working file to make analysis easier. So for a census, I'll add columns that enable me to include things like the street address or occupations or the age of the individual. If I'm working on a birth record, I'll add a column to enable me to add in the maiden name. But whatever data set I'm working on, I always have a column where I record when I add that information to my family tree program and if I have a certificate. Next comes what I'm calling my research phase. Now, up until this point, I've been doing the activities sequentially, but here I'm turning to activities that I do simultaneously. So I do some data analysis by digging into the information from those spreadsheets. For example, with census records, I like to do some analysis about occupations and whether there's any pattern emerging from those. I also look at whether the country of birth is different from the current country where the person is residing. And that gives me a sense of, how mobile people are. At the same time, I will be doing some family reconstruction. My approach here is to begin with the census and then follow a family forwards and backwards in time. And I'll supplement that with anything that I have from a parish record or civil registration. I find that beginning with the census is more productive than starting with the marriage and then looking for offspring. The other activity in this group is what I call contextual research. Another way of thinking about it would be to say it's background reading. I do quite a bit of this because I don't want to have a one-name study that's just about spreadsheets and numbers. I want to understand the people behind those lines. I want to embark really on understanding a lot more about the nature of the city or the town where these people lived. What were the main industries and the source of work, for example. The research might be slightly different depending on the kind of record. So, that's the type of thing that I'll be looking on if I'm working on a census record. I want to look at whether people had to travel far to actually set up their home in this location. How did they travel? What challenges might they have encountered? For example, I've just been reading some books written by university professors about migration from Ireland to England and Scotland during the period of the famine. And that's given me wonderful insight into the routes those migrants took from Ireland to reach their new homes, how much they paid for those passages, the horrendous conditions under which they made those journeys, and then their experience when they arrived in their new country. If I'm working on a completely data set, let's say it is of soldiers who were killed in one of the world wars, then my contextual research is going to be a bit different. So here I'd be looking at where their regiment and their battalion was stationed at various points during the war, in what battles were they involved, what happened on the day when this person was killed. So the material I'll be looking at will include things like regimental histories or maps of the battlefields, and also the war diaries that were kept by the battalion commanders on a daily basis. But I don't want to just keep all of that knowledge and insight for myself. So I do have what I'm labeling a communication and marketing phase in my process. A key element here is the website that I've created, which I call Hyman Footprints. First of all, I take the data from the family reconstruction and upload it into my software program. I use Reunion simply because I use a Macintosh computer, and that was one of the very few options available to me. I upload that data once I've been able to construct a family group and I have a reasonable amount of information about the individuals. I only add people to Reunion when I found a connection to 2 other individuals. In other words, I don't add individuals. At the moment, I don't add them if I just have a couple. I will wait until I can find a child or a sibling or a parent. The reason is simply that I have too many people who have the same name. And I know that if I just have them as individuals in that program, I'll never be able to find them again. Once a week, I'll do a new GEDCOM file and I'll upload that to the TNG element of my website. At the same time, I'll be creating some content for that site using insights from my analysis and from my contextual research. This could be updating an existing page about distribution of the surname, or it could be a story about one individual that I've found of interest. Oops, sorry, something went wrong there. Let me backtrack. Okay, there's a glitch in this slide. I'm sorry, so I'm going to just have to talk around this. In step 9, I'll be working on promotion. Now, I'm almost embarrassed to say that this is something I haven't done very much about until recently. I'm embarrassed because I've worked in communications all my adult life, advising politicians and business leaders how to get their message across and how to market their products effectively. So you'd think that promotion of my study would be one of the first things I did, but that's not the case. My excuse is that I really wanted to wait until I had a substantial amount of information on that website that I could direct people to, and they would, have a good user experience. I didn't want them going to a website that only had 1 or 2 pages of content.
Karen, sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Are you able to go back to the slide so that we've got the details on it? We've had a viewer who would like, that's perfect.
Okay. Is that all right?
Fabulous. I'm hoping that will help Cassandra, who is probably trying to grab a screenshot because I love this slide. So over to you. I'm sorry to have interrupted, Karen.
No, sorry, Cassandra and everyone else. I had tested this multiple times and it worked every time in practice. I don't know what's gone wrong. Anyway, so we are still talking about step number 9, which is called promotion. But I now recognize that the time is right to go further with this. So I'm going to take 2 approaches to begin with. One is that I've contacted a number of family history societies who have active journals or have online newsletters. And these are going to be in the geographies that I've got a substantial amount of information about. And I'm proposing to write articles for them. So I have 2 scheduled for Wales and 1 for Ireland, which will come out in a few months' time. The second approach is to capitalize on the fact that later this year there will be a large number of commemorative events all around the anniversary of the conclusion of World War I. And what I'm doing there is contacting newspapers in the areas where the soldiers that are in my set of records, where those soldiers came from. And I'm suggesting to those editors that we could do a biographical article to make that whole anniversary commemoration relevant for their local readers. That's an idea that's in its infancy, but I did talk yesterday with a newspaper in Scotland about this idea, and they seemed very receptive to it. So I'm now emboldened to have a go in other geographies. And step number 10, I'm not going to move the slide on just because in case it throws us a little bit of a wobbly again, is a recognition that having gone all the way around this circle, ultimately I get to a point where I feel that I've made sufficient progress with that particular resource, or maybe I've even exhausted it and I'm ready to move on. So I then go back to my resource list, find a new resource and start the whole cycle again. What I like about this is that this process has some discipline built into it, but it also has some flexibility. So although I've shown it as a circle, in reality, I do jump around a little because I have the kind of mind that just gets easily distracted. So I might be working, down the bottom right corner on data analysis on one day, and the next day I might feel like doing some family reconstruction. And there is no reason why I can't do that and still keep the whole kind of thing up in the air and working. I've also found that it's possible to have different circles for different geographies and to actually be operating in multiple geographies at the same time. So this one shows you that I kind of felt that the method that I had developed was working well enough for Wales that I could then try it for England. And then I've also gone on further and tried it into other geographies. But I'm at different points in each of those circles. England and Wales is well advanced, and you can see I'm operating in those areas where the arrows are showing. For Scotland, and also for Ireland, I've captured a lot of initial data and I'm sort of still trying to digest all of that. Whereas for New Zealand, I'm right at the start and just getting a sense of what records exist, where to find them, how do you get them. Now, supporting all of this are some key tools that some of them are versions of ones that I found in kind of various guild locations or talking to different guild members. The first one is a notebook that I keep for each country. I prefer to keep my notes on paper rather than on the computer. At the front of every notebook is a map of the country that I'm going to be working on. And for me, that's vital because I don't know where all these places are in relation to each other. I also have my resource list for that country and my task list. On the right, you can see a copy of that resource list at the top. The little kind of image in the middle is a different document that I've created, which actually came out of necessity. It's a family group index. Why I say it came out of necessity was that the more family groups I constructed, the more difficult it became to remember who was who. Particularly when I had so many heads of a household who were called Patrick Heenan, and all seemed to have married women called Mary, and I was completely losing track of who was who. I found it difficult to actually find a system to label these family groups to begin with. I think my first approach was to use a combination of a number and a country. So I had a family group, for example, that was called 101 Wales and a separate one that was 101 England. But I realized pretty quickly that that wouldn't work long term because I found evidence that this family group that I had labeled as England had originated in Ireland. And I really didn't want to have to keep going and changing group names. So I began searching for something that was going to be more sustainable. Now, if any of you have read the Seven Pillars book, you'll know that there are multiple examples in there of different naming systems that people have developed over the years. The one I adopted was probably one of the most simple ones. It's used by the Crab surname study, and it just runs in numerical order starting from 101. I record that number in reunion for every individual in that family group. And then when I upload it through GEDCOM to TNG, it comes across. So I record it always as a suffix. So it's almost like part of the person's name. And that enables me to find the group much easier. I put the index sheet together as a quick reference guide. And in there, I just document the family group number, the name of the earliest ancestor, any partner they have, their key dates, and geographic location. Sometimes, in order to differentiate from one family to another, I might actually add an occupation. So I might kind of say, you know, this one is James and he's a printer, and that James over there is a chemical worker. The tool at the bottom, and this is a more recent one, is my calendar, which helps to keep me focused on all these different activities. When I was working full time, like many of you, I blocked my calendar to give me time to work on specific tasks and projects. And I've just carried that practice through to my surname study. So I allocate a specific day in the week to work on a specific activity. Mondays tend to be the day when I'm going to do analysis. Wednesdays are when I upload the data to TNG. Fridays I do research, and then on the weekend I spend my time writing web content or updating existing content. The search activity or data sheet cleanups tend to be a secondary activity while I'm watching TV, and that's purely because I find it really tedious working on spreadsheets. My final and an even more recent tool is a membership card that enables me to access the library of the University of Wales. It means I can read journals and I can borrow books for my contextual research. And these are the kinds of books that I would never be able to get through my public library, and often would be prohibitively expensive to buy. There's a small annual fee involved, and it was very reasonable to begin with, but it got further reduced because I belong to the local public library system. So I ended up paying only 10 UK pounds, which is not much more than just buying one book. If you live near a university library, I would highly recommend that you go and find out if they've got a similar scheme, because it really has been rewarding. Now, I bet by now you're all kind of thinking, yeah, that's great, Karen, but is this really working? And I would say yes and no. Some things are working really well. The 10-step methodology and the tools that I've mentioned have enabled me to make very good progress. Of course, I'm not finished with any country, but I have felt confident enough with the method to move on to a broader range of countries. I mentioned the website earlier. This was something I did through the Guild's members website project, and it was a really straightforward and seamless process with a lot of good support and help. I chose not to use TNG purely because I simply didn't like the design of the templates. So I decided to use WordPress as the front end, and then to use TNG in the back room to store all my data. WordPress gives me the option to have a static homepage, which is what I've gone for, but I can still have blog posts, so it still looks as if the site is very kind of active and is being maintained frequently. I did spend a lot of time on the design work, and that's because I just kept changing my mind about things like color schemes and what headline size I wanted to, but that's just me. I think you could have done it in a much quicker time than I did. More importantly, I think, above all of those things, I spent a long time trying to decide what I wanted to get out of this study. And I have now nailed down what I call my mission statement and my objectives. And these are really reflective of my interest in families and the economic and social history in which they were participants. But please don't think I have all of this nailed. It's really far from that. There's still a lot of things that I struggle with. Record keeping for me is a constant struggle. I've changed my mind at least 3 times on the family naming system, and I reorganize my computer files more times than I can bear to remember. At the moment, I have information on my computer filed by geography and by dataset, with then separate folders for each family group. And I have a standard protocol for naming of every file. But even with all that in place, I still find that I can't easily put my hands on a particular document at any one time. I have not tackled deviance. I'm going to be perfectly honest, it's because I really don't understand this concept, and I don't know how I would recognize a deviant. So I'm a little bit in denial about their existence. I'll probably come to it at some point, but I have enough to occupy myself with just the exact name of Hyman right now. I have a big kind of challenge about connecting with people who have Hymans in their families. It does feel at some point that I'm working all alone on this. I know there are people who are researching Hyman, and I have tried contacting them via Ancestry, but have had very little success. A lot of them don't even respond. I've tried contacting people who've posted on the Roots forums, But again, they don't respond either. So maybe they've just lost interest, I don't know. I did try an experiment this weekend because I was so fed up, where I located a Facebook group for a small town in Scotland where one of my soldiers lived. And through that, I was able to make contact with some of his living relatives who have given me a commemorative booklet about his life, which I thought was fantastic. So I'm going to try that same approach in other areas. My final challenge is one I know a lot of one namers have, and that is there's just so many things that you want to do, but just can't find the time to do them. For me, I really want to create more visual ways to show the results of my analysis, or to tell the stories of the people I've discovered. I've used Photoshop to produce a few maps like the one you can see here, but I'd love to learn how you can combine a historic map with a modern day map to see how the geography of that particular settlement is changing. And I'd really like to begin using infographics to portray data, because search engines like Google really like that. Now, as much as I've got, a lot of these frustrations, I've also recognized that I've learned a lot. One is that I need to be more patient, that there really isn't any need to rush. And I keep reminding myself that, the people I'm looking at and researching have been dead for an awful long time. So they can probably wait a few months or maybe even years for me to get to them. I've also learned to accept that I'm not going to get things right the first time around. Just like when I first started learning German years ago, I couldn't order a meal without making a mess of the grammar. So I shouldn't expect to be an expert in surname studies overnight. But I think that's where other members of the Guild really have come to my aid, and I am very confident that they'll do so in the future. Some kind of new members may be nervous about approaching another member of the Guild that they don't know, and asking what might sound like a very basic question. My strong advice to you, if you feel like that, is not to worry about it. No one I have ever contacted in the Guild has said no. Most, well, without exception, they have been more than generous with their time. And I've learned something from every single member I've contacted, whether that was through email or direct phone call or Facebook or the Guild forum. I think what I'm trying to say is that the help exists. It's up to us to use it. And with that, I hope that I've left you feeling a little bit more reassured and confident about your own ability to take your study forward. And I'm going to hand it back to Julie, because I think we have some time for questions.
Oh, Karen, well done. What a brilliant presentation. I was sitting here scribbling notes, and I've been researching my family history and one name studies for more than 20 years. There are some questions, so I'm just going to quickly run through some of the not in-depth questions first of all. So someone's asked about the introduction course to one name studies. I'll just quickly jump in and just answer that. The introduction course, the next one will start the 16th of October. And the website to go to is pharostutors.com. I will make sure that the information for that is on the page where the recordings will be, so you'll be able to find the details should you not be able to find the website. We then had Robert, who asked what TNG is.
Okay, do you want me to tackle that one?
Yep, you carry on.
Okay, it's called The Next Generation, Robert, and it's a commercial program that is designed for genealogy records. It's quite a comprehensive one, and I really have only touched the surface of what it can offer. You know, it will enable you to build a family tree, to actually produce charts and everything, but you can just store all of your information. So instead of buying another program, whether that's I'm trying to think of a name, My Family Historian, or the one I use, Reunion, you can just use TNG. But the Guild is using that extensively for its website project. And if you go onto the Guild website, and in one of the drop-down menus, you'll see a whole page about the website project and the kind of options available. And it does explain in there what TNG is. I've probably done a very bad job of explaining that, Julie.
No, you've done a great job. As someone who does love TNG, I like the TNG, but what I didn't like was the WordPress themes that went along with it. So I've kept my blog separate from my TNG site. It works for me, and I think that the biggest message as a Faros tutor that I give to people when I teach the intro course, and that the Guild always say to members, is that we've almost got 3,000 members, and there's not quite almost 3,000 ways to do a study, but there are so many ways. People have to find the way that works for them and manipulate perhaps what someone else does to find their own way forward. Cassandra asks, what task list and calendar do you use?
Okay, for task list, it's a basic word processing document, Cassandra. I can't even remember the name of the one I've got. I think it's called Pages because it's an Apple product. But Word, if you're a Windows user, would do just exactly the same job. And, you know, as I said, I wanted something that was very simple. The other question you asked me about calendar was, I use the one that comes with my Apple computer. I did have a look at Google Calendar to see if it gave me any more options, but it was pretty much the same thing. I believe you could probably buy dedicated calendars or even download a lot of them for free, but I just used the simple approach.
Okay, so let's have another quick look. Shelley asks, what was the title of the 10th step?
Oh, that's the one where I just say, okay, now I'm going and I choose another resource. So having gone all the way from 1 round to 9, I get to the point where I think I've either exhausted this particular data set, especially if it's a very small one, or you know, I've gone as far as I can with it right now. I'm ready to move on. I'm going to go and find a different resource.
Okay.
So the title just was, I think, select new resource. Actually, I might be able to pull it up. There we are.
Yeah, look at that. You're a pro now, Karen. So it's choose your next resource. And I love this slide because I think it really breaks it down to what you do, which is great. And I think sometimes I'm a great list writer, so I record everything I do. I have a page-a-day diary. I write in it it's my second brain. So if I've looked at a data set, I record everything. And I think it's a really good way to make sure that you don't repeat the same work. I may repeat going to a data set if there's been some additions to it, but I always record what I've looked at, what I've found, and especially if I've not found anything. And I think that's really important. And unlike you, I'm a pen and paper girl. As much as I love technology, I love to have a notebook, and I have to have the right pen. Anyone out there who is a notebook fan will know exactly what I mean. It sounds very obsessive. My husband can just pick up any old pen, but I'm afraid I have to buy the same pen. I write in the same range of colours, and I've done that for, well, probably 30 years easily. So I think it's just a really good way of having some discipline and structure. The next question we've had is from Hilary. So she mentions that the best place that she's found to contact others is through Wikitree.
Right.
I don't know
Yeah,
whether you've
I've had a look.
explored Wikitree.
I have had a look at Wikitree. I think I was a little bit confused initially, Hilary, because I thought it was a way of being able to upload a GEDCOM file. But when I actually looked at it, essentially what it was doing was just looking for a match to see if anybody else had already added that individual to Wikitree. So then I found that if I was going to use it, I'd have to start all over again, and manually put in all of the information I had with all of the sources, etc. And I thought, I'm not sure that there's going to be an awful lot of value by doing this. But if you've had a different experience, I'd love to hear about that. So maybe send me an email and tell me what techniques you found, because I'd be really interested to learn that.
I have to say, I'm with you, Karen. I find Wikitree very muddly. So I think that is probably a really great article for the journal, Hilary. No
Yeah.
pressure. But I think that would be really, really great. I just think that we have this ability to explore and do all different things as a way of promoting our studies, and getting out there to connect with other people. Cassandra's has just said here that some people are using Google Maps to combine historic and modern maps, and suggests looking at some Lisa Louise Cook videos. And I would actually agree, Lisa Louise Cook videos are great. I don't know whether you're familiar with Lisa Louise Cook's website, Karen. If you're not, we'll perhaps produce a news post, or I'll produce a news post in the next few days with the links to the various things we've talked about today, so that people can then see those links and then can perhaps look at them.
Yeah, that would be helpful, because I know I was watching some video, which I think was from the BYU University, and that was talking about GIS mapping. And by the time I got to the second of the three videos in the series, I was completely lost. So hopefully Google Maps is a bit of a more of a simpler approach.
Yeah, the one thing that I have learned through my fumbling through TNG, although I have to say the members that we have that are volunteering their time to support people using TNG, is it does allow you to geotag locations,
Yeah.
which is excellent. I love that. Because I'm a fairly visual person, so I even though I'm quite wordy too, I rather like being able to have it pinpointed. There's another question actually from Hilary, and she's asking, how do you sign up to the university library? Hilary lives in Wales and already use what I thought was through the local library. So is there something extra that Hilary can do?
Hilary, I'll have a look for the link for you, and I can pop it on in an email. I just found it on their website, and it was pretty simple to do. I just had to go and produce a letter to kind of basically, prove who I was and take some ID with me. They did a picture, and within 30 minutes, I was in the library.
Excellent, and I know from experience of having access to a university library is a real asset. Gloria says, wonderful, so much food for thought and such helpful information. Thank you. And Cassandra says, how do you move from spreadsheet to genealogical database retype?
Oh yeah, I'm afraid that is what happens. I tried doing copy paste, but the reunion program really doesn't like it. And every time you do the paste function, it just saves it as some sort of odd media file. So I find that grunt work that's not very rewarding, and I wish there was a different way of doing it.
I would agree with you. I've got two very large studies, but very different studies, and I would love to be able to convert an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are some programs out there, but I need everything at simple Simon language, and not and for the if I don't understand something, I might just well retype because it's much quicker. Linda asks, is there a handout? There's not a handout, Linda, but the recording of this presentation from Karen and the pre-recording from Melanie's, which was brilliant, I listened over the weekend, will be up on the website on around Thursday. So I would certainly come back, watch them both on the website, which would be brilliant. Melanie's was very different to Karen's presentation, and it just gives you a really good understanding that two people almost at the same stages of their study can do things completely differently. Paul asks, how much contact has Karen had from her website?
Not nearly enough. In fact, the silence is deafening. Now, partly because, as I said earlier on, Hyman is a very small surname. So the population of people who are going to be interested is consequently quite small. Also, I haven't done a huge amount to actually promote it right now. But that's where I'm ready to move into a new phase. What I really didn't want was people somehow getting to the web page and then finding there was no content there. And I know that using techniques like search engine optimization, you can help to increase the ranking of your website in Google search. However, they do take into account in their kind of algorithm whether you've got people linking into you and how many visitors you have. So it sort of tends to all come together. But if by this time next year I'm still seeing fairly low numbers, then I'm going to get more frustrated again.
Just from a personal view, I remember starting the Orlando study and there was literally just me. And I went to Facebook and created a group. My husband had to join it because of the way Facebook sets up. You can't create a group with just one person in it. And I was amazed. I think I did a presentation to one of the US groups. And almost overnight, I had gone from kind of like 2 people, and there is around 59 in there now, and I've done very little to promote it, if I'm honest. And I think I've called it Orlando Families, I think. As a way of getting people to see it. I'm not very good at working it in terms of my study, but what I've always said, and through the Pharos course, I think I probably said it quite a few times, is work your study, get out there and tell people that you exist, because if you don't, they might not find you. The other thing I would recommend would be a DNA project, especially if you've got a small study. Although I will say that does not necessarily guarantee that you're going to get a match, but I would certainly tell me worth exploring, especially as it's getting harder to find a surname that isn't already in a project. But that was just 2 things from me. Let's have a quick glance. So, okay, so Andrea, who is a Guild member, says, on the subject of Google Maps, yes, the TNG mapping tool is great for showing movement and events which took place in different countries. Also, yesterday, for the first time, I managed to add a place to Google Maps, a cemetery, which was that you could not see where it was, but it was not named. So she's managed to pinpoint a particular cemetery on this map. That's great. You have got more patience than I have, Andrea, because being half Italian, I have 0 patience. Cassandra asks, can anyone contact you first? So has anyone just written to you, Karen, and just said, hi, I'm researching the Hyman name?
Yes, they did. And we had quite a good exchange for a couple of weeks, and then they went dead. And I've tried contacting them back, but get no response. Again, I wonder whether they've just lost enthusiasm because they couldn't get answers quickly. And then I did have another one in Australia that I kept up contact with for a few years through my own kind of family history. That was interesting until I got to the point where I realized that she wasn't using the same robustness that I wanted to see in my own study about sourcing.
Sure.
Gently pointing out that some of the information she had couldn't possibly be true, and here's the evidence, why not? But she won't accept it. So that's a kind of a difficult one, I think, when you are working with other researchers.
I would agree with you there. I think if people don't want to source their information, and at the beginning, it's really easy to get swept away following somebody and keep clicking and suddenly think, actually, now I've got all these downloads from Ancestry and I can't remember where they all came from, and then having to retrace your steps. Which links into a question that we've had from Melody, who says, is there a way to download digital data directly from Ancestry? I'm assuming you're meaning things like census, Melody, in which case, yes, I believe you can, because I frequently do it. You can download. You can also save it to, I think, what Ancestry call a shoebox. So yes, you can download. As far as I'm aware, you can't download a tree from Ancestry unless it's your own tree. So I'm hopefully that's answered your question. If it hasn't, Melody, just ask another question back, and we'll see if we can pick it up properly. Do you have a DNA project, Karen?
No, I don't, and I'm not sure that I'm that interested in it at the moment. But I don't really know enough about it to make a decision either way. I think I've got enough to be working on right now in other kind of ways, in a sense.
Yeah, Cassandra asked about if if there was any interaction from a Y DNA group. I think what I like about having a DNA project, I can only speak from my personal experience, is that there is this ability to have this presence. So you have this project and you hope that somebody will join and join your project, which puts their DNA matches into the project. And I'm explaining this really, really badly. And there are lots of great DNA presentations. But we had Morris Gleason on, I think around March time, who had a really great presentation. And there is quite a few presentations that Morris has got on his website. So they will do a discussion on DNA far better than I can do. But what I will say is, by having the ability to have the project there, I find that people do transport, or export's probably a better way of putting it, their raw DNA from Ancestry and add it into the project. And I've had somebody recently do that for my Orlando study. Everybody who joins my Orlando DNA project gets a little note from me that says, hi, welcome to the project. This is where the website is. And if you'd like to contribute any information, please do. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it works, but several years after I wrote the initial email, because people just get caught up with real life, I suppose. Jan says, if you want to download the list of search results from Ancestry, you could try out WitHub. So I'm guessing that is the answer to Melody, if that helps. I'm assuming we've answered Melody's question because she hasn't answered back. So we are just over the hour. Karen, thank you. You have done a brilliant job. I really enjoyed listening to your presentation this evening. And I really am glad that you agreed to, with very little arm twisting, I have to say, to do the presentation. You've done a brilliant, and of course to Mel, who was really disappointed that she couldn't be here to do it live. So what we did was we pre-recorded Melanie's presentation. As I said, I heard it over the weekend and it is fabulous.
First, I'd like to thank Karen Davies for presenting today and Melanie Caldecott for presenting via a pre-recording. We all feel a bit overwhelmed when starting or restarting a one-name study, and there are so many approaches and focuses for our research, our record keeping, and our methodology, both for our one-name studies as well as our family history. Perhaps what you've heard and seen today gets you thinking beyond your current practices. Second, I want to thank Julie Goucher for handling not only the tech, but for jumping in at the last minute when I couldn't be at the webinar live. She handled the introduction and the questions brilliantly. Third, I want to thank Kim Baldacchino, who, in addition to working on her own studies, has served as our webmaster for the past 4 years. During this time, we had a major overhaul of our website, both in front, what we all see, and behind the scenes, really the brains of the website. And Kim has been the driving force in our website entering the 21st century. Kim has gone out of her way to help the marketing action team by answering questions, providing guidance, and patiently explaining the process for getting our webinar series up and running on the Guild website. I, for one, will miss her kind, thoughtful, and always encouraging assistance. The Guild is a volunteer-run organization, and it takes lots of volunteer time and effort to provide the various services and benefits to Guild members. Our website is our public face to the online world, and we appreciate our website team for all their efforts. A reminder that our next webinar is on Tuesday, August 21st at 7 p.m. British Summer Time, and that will show up in the GoToWebinar platform adjusted for the time on your computer. Our topic for the August webinar is My Italian Surname Study. This will be a great opportunity to learn about a one-name study that does not have its basis or origin in the UK, and several of our registered studies fit this description. Michael Casera and Julie Goucher are going to discuss how they approach a study that incorporates foreign records, a few foreign languages, a completely different culture, and in most cases, different church records. While their focus is on an Italian one-name study, the concept applies equally to any non-UK one-name study. Thanks so much for joining us, and the recording of this webinar, as well as the pre-recorded webinar, so you're actually getting a bonus webinar this month, they'll both be up at the Guild website by Monday, July 23rd. You'll receive an email notification as soon as they are available. And in the spirit of next month, ci vediamo il prossimo mese. Addio. See you next month. Goodbye.